The views and opinions expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated. Reproduction or dissemination other than for the purpose of education or information without the express written permission of the Phoenix Research Institute or Nova Society Media is strictly prohibited.
I'd like to welcome everyone back to the Nova Society. I'm your host, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and I'm here with my panel, Dr. Scott Gershwer and Dr. Mark Bound. And today we are all weeping over the results of the 2024 presidential election. So with that, we will share our thoughts and our comments. We're glad that our listeners are back with us.
I know Priscilla wanted to be here today. Unfortunately, she's double booked, and she wanted to talk about how the media won this election. And I think we'll save that for next week. And I think that's an interesting conversation to have. What was the impact of the media? And I think we're going to see that once we get more numbers. This is just one day afterwards. Once we get more numbers, once we get the breakdown of demographics, how did the Hispanics vote? How did the Black vote go? How did the male vote go? How did the female vote? How did the educated versus the uneducated go? Just when we start seeing all those breakdowns, right now it's just, the general exit polling. Once we start to really see the numbers in depth, we can make a pretty good assumption of where the country is going and exactly how much the country is going to be willing to put up with. Will the country be willing to allow Ukraine to fall? Will the country be willing to allow the Palestinians to be wiped out? I don't know. How much whining is there going to be if the tariffs are put in place, as he said he wants to do? How is that going to impact the people that it's going to truly affect negatively? That's something that we'll be talking about that 2 years from now, and probably saying, "Hey, you got what you asked for," which is exactly what we got.
And one of those things, and hopefully it'd be interesting to have Priscilla back to talk about this. There won't be a woman candidate, at least on the Democratic side, for quite some time. That ship has sailed, and it may be unfair, but it's not going to happen. I'm going to say it's not going to happen in our lifetime.
Yep, you may be right.
I mean, it's just, that's twice now. Sadly, there are a lot of men out there who simply will not vote for a woman.
That's right. And
it's a crazy thing to even say, but that appears to be a fact. 2028 going to be all about Gavin Newsom, Josh Shapiro, Pete Buttigieg, maybe. Who knows who else on the Democratic side. I'm assuming that they're going to have, if there's an election at all, that they're going to have Republican candidates, because he's not going to be eligible to run again. And it's possible that the Republicans will, rally behind Nikki Haley.
I think Trump will make himself eligible to run again.
I don't know if that's possible, but
I mean, let's not project something that
82 years old, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and you'd have to have a change to the Constitution. You're not going to get that. You're simply not going to get that. And
he'll ignore it. And he'll say that, everything's going so well, and whatever, that, now's not the time to change this or that. There'll be something, and the Supreme Court will go along with it, and he'll continue if he's alive.
I doubt that very highly.
I hope you're right.
I think that's an alarmist kind of thing, and that's 4 years down the road. So no, I mean, that is less of a concern to me than some of the things that have been said that's going to happen over these 4 years that impact the lives of people, such as rounding up all these immigrants and deporting them or doing whatever they're going to do. And that's,
jailing and suing anybody who criticizes him in public.
Again, okay, knock yourself out. I mean, my attitude toward this is is really simple. If you can be a 34-time convicted felon and be the president of the United States, law and order really doesn't matter all that much to me. Of course, I've always said that, life in prison as you get a little older is less and less of a deterrent because it's like, okay, you're going to give me 3 odds and a cock, great. But I just don't see, I think there's a breaking point on what the United States populace will accept. Yes, this is a cult. It's still a cult, but I just can't see it going much beyond this. But again, we have to wait and we have to see. But like I say, the big thing will be breaking down those demographics and seeing what, exactly how this go. Scott's right. There's a lot of men out there, but women outnumber us.
Yeah, but they didn't come out and vote, apparently.
That's right. And the question then is why? Why didn't they come out and vote? And I think that's going to be, why, 32% of Democrats, what'd you say, 36% of Republicans? Even the Republicans didn't come out.
34%, 32,
right.
30, it was, 34%. I mean, just unbelievable.
That's like 60% of the population that was eligible to vote didn't show up. Is it that we're tired of democracy? That's really a question that really has to be asked. Is it the fact that 250 years, when we've talked about this in the past week or two about sustainability of democracy, is it that just the American people have just tired have just become tired of the whole process and just basically don't care anymore, which is very possible of a thesis that's where we sit. We're no different now than Russia or China or any of the rest of them. We've tired of the democratic process to the point where we won't even participate in it because we're so tired of it. And I think that's a concern.
All right, let's have some fun then.
Okay.
Shall we?
Please, let us.
Okay. So the other day, a name came to me from the past, and I didn't think much of it at the time, but given the paucity of votes, I decided to look him up again and see if this rings a bell with anybody out there. I really doubt it will. The name is Ken Blackwell. Ken Blackwell is a former U.S. ambassador, and he was the Secretary of State for the state of Ohio, former city council person from Cincinnati. So in an interview with All Israel News, Ken Blackwell said, the thing that's important here is for Trump to implement his agenda quickly. And it is that for Trump to implement his agenda quickly and effectively, he has to run the trifecta. He has to win the presidency, the Republicans in the Senate, and keep the House. And he predicted several days ago that they would do all three. And he said, okay, we know about the presidency, right? We know about the Senate, where Democrats had to defend seats in Montana and Ohio that were hard to defend, and we didn't, right?
And West Virginia.
Right. Well, that was, Manchin had given that up, but he was no longer a Democrat anyway, and probably more of a Democrat in name only, even when he was a Democrat. But he also felt, and I don't know how this worked out, that they would get Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. I think they did, right? Did Tina, did she lose? Bob Casey, believe, lost, right? I haven't really looked at the Senate yet. But in any event, the Republicans are getting control of the Senate, right? Ted Cruz kept his seat. And so this guy, Blackwell, was the architect of the Republican strategy in Ohio in 2004 when John Kerry lost to George W. Bush. And the reason it came up, the reason I looked it up, was because I was thinking about that election like a week ago or so. I began thinking back to old elections. And I actually went to bed on election night 2004 believing that John Kerry was the next president of the United States. I went to bed too early because sometime around midnight, they called the race for George W. Bush. Okay. You guys remember that?
Yes.
Okay. So what happened in 2004? Well, an article that I was reading in Rolling Stone magazine that came out in, I don't have the issue, was called "Was the 2004 Election Stolen?" And the subhead was "Republicans prevented more than 350,000 voters in Ohio from casting ballots or having their votes counted, and that would have been enough to put John Kerry in the White House." The author of this article, and this is the fun part, was Robert Kennedy Jr., RFK Jr.
Wow.
So Kennedy Jr., at that time a Democrat, at that time, still in fairly good standing. I'm trying to find the date on the article to see what the what issue it was. It says in this article that Ohio was as dirty an election as America has ever seen. And the reason for that was this guy, Ken Blackwell. Ken Blackwell was in charge. He was the Secretary of State at the time, in charge of counting the vote, and did more to suppress the vote than anybody had, and bragged about it openly. He was Bush, not just the Secretary of State, but he was also Bush's re-election chairman in Ohio, and later on ran for governor of Ohio, although I do believe he lost. He is a partisan, as you can imagine. And let's see if I can find the hot spot here. He permitted election officials in Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Toledo to conduct a massive purge of the voter rolls, expunging the names of more than 300,000 voters who had failed to cast ballots in the previous two elections. In Cleveland, which had gone 5-1 for Kerry, nearly 1 out of every 4 voters were wiped off the list. Some of them had moved, some of them had died, some of them were legit, but what ended up happening was the turnout was 7% in Cleveland, the lowest in the state, because disenfranchised voters got notice that they couldn't show up on election day. So he was the architect of the 2004 Bush re-election. He was an ambassador under, I'm guessing, George W. Bush. I don't remember his name ever coming up related to Trump before, but obviously he's well known to RFK Jr. And it is certainly possible, if we want to play around a little bit, that RFK Jr. had mentioned this fellow's acumen for suppressing votes, and made a lot of voters who expected that they were eligible ineligible, and that's why only 32% of Democrats voted in this election.
Well, that's a theory.
The article in Rolling Stone, by the way, was June 1st, 2006.
Okay. Oh, and by the way, Bob Casey is behind in the Senate race in Pennsylvania, but at 97% of the vote counted, he trails by 48,200. So okay. That has not yet been called yet. So we'll see how that works. Yeah, I mean, there's going to be all sorts of theories out there. I mean, that's as good as any. I heard a great one. If you want to have a little bit even more fun, Donald Trump goes to McDonald's and works the fry machine. The next day, McDonald's, not the same location, has E. coli in their quarter pounders. So was that, and because again, part of the QAnon theory is that more Democrats eat at McDonald's than Republicans, and it was an attempt to kill off Republicans with E. coli, with Donald Trump working the fry machine. So, I mean, this is the crazy stuff that people are going to come up with. But I think what you're saying, Scott, is again, it's very, very possible. But I guess the thing that gets me is that, and it goes back to my original comment, your vote can only be suppressed if you allow it to be.
Right. But here's a couple of things. So for one thing, Democrats aren't as good, as you pointed out, at getting their Irish up when it comes to having grievances, right? Democrats aren't by and large a grievance-oriented party.
No, they're more based on guilt.
Guilt and curling up in the corner and in a fetal position.
Correct.
And in 2004, now remember, 2004 followed the 2000 election, which was also one of the shakiest elections ever run, which ended up down in Florida, was that year's big swing state, and ended up going on for months. And it was tearing the country apart, and the Brooks Brothers riot and all that, and then the Supreme Court steps in and basically hands the presidency to George W. Bush. Now, this is 4 years later. Now we're talking about Ohio. And as I said, I remember distinctly going to bed that night and thinking, okay, well, at least, John Kerry is president. Maybe we'll get out of Iraq. Maybe we'll stop all this craziness that was going on at that time. And it hadn't even peaked yet, right? So we're talking about 2004, where this is before the insurgencies in Iraq that were, blowing up trucks, and what's his name, Rumsfeld saying, well, we don't have armor in our Humvees because you go to war with the equipment you have, the army you have, not the one you wish you had. And that the protests over the 2004 election were immediately shot down by none other than the Washington Post and the New York Times, who claimed that conspiracy theories cannot replace voter turnout, and the New York Times saying there is no evidence of vote theft or errors on a large scale, and that just shut up and take your loss and move on with it. And we did. I don't remember anybody protesting the 2004 election. Obviously 2006, that midterm was a big swing towards Democrats, and then 2008, Barack Obama became president. So, you have to wait for these things, but sometimes good things can happen. The last election, 2020, was accompanied or followed by massive amounts of protests, which people are still going to jail for. Yesterday, a participant in January 6th was sentenced to 4 months in prison for being in the Capitol. And he actually got more radicalized after he left the Capitol than he had been going in. Going in, he simply wanted to, protest, and ended up in the Capitol itself, not with the intent to do any harm to anybody. So he wasn't armed. He didn't have anything with him other than a mask, which was how they managed to identify him, because it was a very identifiable mask. But he was, one of these QAnon people. But when he left there and thought that he had gotten away with it, he became more and more radical. And in this election was actually gearing up for violence, found with a truckload of Molotov cocktails and all kinds of weapons and things like that. And we don't know where he was headed for it, but that's that's what they found when they arrested him after all these years. So we know that was a big mess, and we know that Trump is never going to be held accountable for it, right? Unless it happens real quick within the next few months, which is not likely to happen. But the 2000 election was stolen. The 2004 election was stolen. I'm not saying this one was. I don't, we'll find out eventually why so many people didn't vote. And there could be very plausible reasonable explanations for that. But it's interesting that this guy's name pops up and that RFK Jr. wrote this article about him talking about how horrible the guy is in 2006, but now in 2024 could actually be on the same side with the guy. Ken Blackwell. It's worth looking into.
Yeah. No, it's also interesting that the vice president-elect of the United States once called the president-elect of the United States the American Hitler.
Right.
It's politics. You get strange bedfellows that come together. People change on a dime. So I was very surprised to see that George W. Bush, too, congratulated Trump. Now, he could have stepped up and said something, and he didn't. So again, you're right. There's going to be a lot of theories going to be coming out, and we don't know what the answers are right yet. Couldn't even begin to fathom what it is. For the next 4 years, actually until Inauguration Day, we'll probably be looking at the data as to who showed up, who didn't, and some of the names run that are going to serve in the Trump's second presidency. So we're going to have that look, and then we're just going to, for the rest of the Trump terms, basically have a look at how this is all working out. Is he going to put in 65% of Project 2025? I don't know. Right now that's all you can do. As I say, guaranteed, you're probably not going to have another January 6th like we had before. I thought it was very funny that during before the state was called, Trump was saying that Pennsylvania, that there was illegal stuff going on, and it was, a rigged election in Pennsylvania. Well, you won. Oh, now all of a sudden it's not. Now all of a sudden it's all fair. So I think that the most puzzling thing of all this is, are we that dumb, or have we become that apathetic? And I know, Scott, you always say you have faith in the American people. I'm a little bit more of a realist. I do not. And I think that this, whether it be because, we're just ignorant, or whether it be because we're apathetic, either way, this is what created the situation that the country is in today. And we're where we're at. Like I say, next week when we do meet, we're probably going to have more numbers.
Sorry, I would say both ignorance and apathy. I don't see why it has to be one or the other.
Well, no. And I agree, Brooke. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
And probably, as Scott has mentioned, there would be suppression of some type that had not occurred to me. Thank you for the information in the article, Scott. We will certainly find out, I guess, over time, with people like, ProPublica and other investigative journalists.
Right. But as my wife always says to me, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah,
exactly.
Nothing. Just talk about it.
Exactly.
I guess. Get ourselves in trouble.
Yeah. And of course, my wife, Linda, today, I got up and she said, "Told you so." And I went, "Really? Really?" But, and as she said, as she was walking out the door, she said, "You know what? It's you and me against the world. No big deal. We'll do it. We'll just keep doing what we're doing, and the heck with it. It is what it is." And again, my fear of this, and I know that Scott sees it as being very pessimistic on my part, which I can be, that now we've thrown the country, if it ever gets back on track, and I'm now not even sure it will. Let's see how the country reacts to this 4 years if things don't go well, and if some of the things that, the predictions that were made as to what would happen to the economy, and let's see what happens, and then we can maybe make a little bit better determination 4 years from now, if we're all still alive and not in a gulag. We can maybe make, an idea of when the country gets back to its senses, if it ever is going to. And I'll tell you, after seeing this, and I did note the low turnout, and no, Brooke, I don't think that it's one or the other, but that really is a deadly combination. Stupidity and apathy combined together is a terrible recipe for sustaining a strong democracy.
So that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this week's episode, the Phoenix Research Group, an independent research consortium offering social issue solutions to NGOs and international government agencies through multidisciplinary, nonpartisan, and unbiased research. We'd also like to thank our podcast partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing partners, Podkite, who does all our analytics, iHeart Radio, where people get their music and podcasts, Apple iTunes, the largest source of music and podcasts on the internet, Spotify, the most popular source for the Nova Society. The Nova Society is available on all these and other quality platforms mentioned in our description. We'd like to thank our listeners. Without you, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a comment, a question, or would like to be a guest on the Nova Society, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. Always remember, the power of society is knowledge. So for Dr. Scott Gershworth, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Be well, and we hope to see you again next time.